advisory meeting. Could I get a roll call? David Lutz?
Here.
Mike Huff?
Here.
Jackie Katz?
Here.
Rob Garrity?
Muted, but here.
And me, Susan Klein. That makes 5. That is a quorum, even though it is very, very slim. I apologize. We have Jonathan Hurwitz, who had something come up. Brian Beachkovsky is out of town, and Kiera Moore is in labor. So about to have a new member of their family. So if someone can make it, let's start with the Erica, I'm sorry, can you remind me the dates of the 2 meetings that we approved, minutes that we approved last week?
It was
Last week was the 16th and the 23rd.
Okay, so if somebody can make a motion to revote on the minutes from the 16th and the 23rd, and then we'll do the minutes from last week and the week before.
We do them separately?
Yeah, we have to do them individually.
Sorry.
I would make, wait a minute.
Who do you know who actually did the meetings?
That's why I'm trying to figure. I didn't.
David, you did the 16th.
I think Mike. Hold on. I actually think, Erica, didn't we do? Last week was what date? I'm sorry.
Last week was the 23rd, which I think you did the 16th.
What was the date of last week's meeting? It was the 30th.
30th.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yep.
So the week before, Mike wasn't here, and I didn't have the minutes yet, so we didn't do that one.
No, we did. Last week we caught up
with the 16th and the one before that. Mike was there for the one before that.
The one on the 2nd.
And then I did the 16th, and we'll do the 23rd and the 30th in addition to the 16th and the 9th. Tonight.
So, okay. So last week, I just pulled up my minutes from last week.
Yep.
Last week, we did the minutes from March 2nd and the minutes from March 16th.
Okay, that's right. We skipped the 9th. Okay.
So
Mike
make the motion for the second. I make a motion to accept the meeting minutes for March 2nd.
Okay, David Lutz?
Yes.
Mike Huff?
Yes.
Jackie Katz?
Yes.
Rob Garrity?
Yes.
And Susan Klein, yes. Okay, those minutes have been approved and are ready to be submitted.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt the minutes of the March 16th meeting.
A second.
Okay, David Lutz?
Yes.
Mike Huff?
Yes.
Jackie Katz?
Yes.
Rob Garrity?
Yes.
And Susan Klein, yes.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt the meeting minutes of the March 23rd meeting.
A second.
Okay, David Lutz?
Yes.
Mike Huff?
Yes.
Jackie Katz?
Yes.
Rob Garrity?
Yes.
And Susan Klein, yes.
I'd like to move to accept the meeting minutes for March 30th.
I'll second that.
Thank you. David Lutz?
Yes.
Mike Huff?
Yes.
Jackie Katz?
Yes.
Rob Garrity?
Yes.
Susan Klein, yes. Okay, so all minutes have been approved up until today's date and will be submitted to the town clerk. So if everyone...
I'll see you at town hall, Mike.
Yeah, you're responsible for signing those and submitting. I think technically the ones that you already signed for the first 2, even though they weren't voted on the right way, I think those don't have to re-sign, but you may want to check with Carol on that.
I have to drop off 2 weeks ago anyways, so.
Okay, great. All right. Thank you. And again, sorry, Rich, thank you for coming. Sorry that it is such a slim advisory board this evening, but both Brian and Jonathan are going to watch this on YouTube to get caught up before next week's, or whenever we're going to vote. I'm not sure if we're doing it next week or the week after, but whenever they vote, they'll be caught up. So if you want to go ahead and take the floor, that would be great.
Sure. I do have Chad Peck, Vice Chair, with me tonight, part of the meeting. to participate. So with that, I'll give you an update on the zoning articles relative to the Springtown meeting warrant. So the planning board held their public hearing last week on March 30th. And I'm going to go in reverse order in terms of numbers. And the reason why that is, you'll probably get a sense of it once, as I go through this. Article 24 was adopted as written on the warrant. Do you have the warrant in front of you, or did you want me to screen share
You're welcome to screen share, or if you want, we all have copies. We can pull them up, whichever's easier for you.
If you have it in front of you, that's fine. That's acceptable.
Is everyone okay with pulling it up themselves, or would you guys rather have it on the screen?
Okay, just remind me which article we're on.
Article 24. So
you're starting in the middle, actually.
Yeah, I'm starting in the middle.
Okay.
Keep you on your toes. Why don't I just, if actually Erica wants to give me screen share ability.
Yep. You're sharing now.
All right. So just. Open. All right, so I'm gonna. Do you see my screen now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right.
Yes, we can see you.
Okay. So let me just scroll down. So the article is going to starting with 24 relative to the nature center definition that's being added to the residential R3 district, the change to table of allowable uses, and then also inserting the word setback for section F5 for accessory buildings. It's taking me a while to scroll down.
Rich, I think Article 24 is just the accessory building.
Yeah. We'll start there. Sorry. I'm going to keep the edits on, just hopefully it doesn't confuse it too much, only because as we get to the recodification, I think it's helpful to see that as I go through the articles. But
I think you're looking for page 24.
24.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, yeah. So you've got some of these renumbered then from what I printed out today. Okay.
Well, this is the one without accepting the changes, so it should be.
Yep. I gotcha. There it is.
Right.
Yep.
So Article 24 was accepted and recommended by the planning board as written, no changes to it, which just, to recap, is inserting the word setback in terms of where accessory buildings can be located. So remember those 50-foot setback, and actually in all the residential districts, so accessory structures can't be within that 50-foot setback, which runs from the left and the right property lines across the front, and I'll call it more of a rectangular shape. When it comes to a corner lot, there are two front yard setbacks, so that on a corner lot, those accessory buildings can't be within 50 feet as well, which could be considered a front yard. They voted this as recommended. We did talk about it last time why, and if anybody needs me to state why, I can. If not, I'll just pause here for any comments on this particular one.
Sorry, just as a refresher, Rich. So the people that are currently, this would just be for new zoning. The people that are in violation of this today, they're grandfathered in somehow.
Yeah, they're grandfathered.
All right.
And just to add a little bit more context to it, the building department has been enforcing this bylaw, this provision of it in terms of 50 feet. So this just it puts that word in there just to clarify what's already been enforced already within the town. So it just is more directory for people to understand where that point of measurement is, because it didn't have setback in it before. When we go to the next article. Was there any questions on this 24?
Rich, can I ask a quick question?
Sure. Yeah.
Did you get any comments in opposition to this? Planning board?
No, there wasn't any opposition from anyone in this case.
Did you get any questions about what it might impact?
No, we didn't get any questions of those nature.
Okay, I'm just trying to anticipate what might happen at town meeting.
Yeah.
So thank you.
So Rich, under the grandfathering, if you have a shed in your side yard, but in the first 50 feet and it falls down, you would be able to replace it only with a shed of the same exact dimensions, correct?
Yes.
If you had an 8x8, you got to have an 8x8. You can't have a 10x8 because that violates zoning.
Correct. Yep.
Rich, what health safety or I forget what the other criteria of zoning does this actually satisfy?
Well, it wouldn't really fall on any of those. I think it's more in terms of just the general aesthetics, how you want to have accessory structure laid out on each individual property. Doesn't really click it. It doesn't check any of those boxes, but
Right. It's taste.
it's taste.
Yeah, we
Correct.
don't like detached garages. We don't like carriage houses. We don't like sheds in the front yard.
Yeah. So just since you brought that point up, we did last year attempt to try to make some changes to create some flexibility, and particularly with smaller lots that are out there within the town, but also even some of the larger lots, in terms of, what typically you might, without a zoning guru or really somebody dives into zoning bylaws, think of the front yard, it gets tripped up on the side. So really, if you think about your side, you've got 200 feet of frontage, you might have 300 feet of frontage. And we've had situations, where somebody puts the shed within 50 feet. So they're probably looking at it as their side yard, really, not the front side. And so we tried to fashion some language to give some flexibility for people, but we backed away. And why we backed away and tabled is because then we went down this pathway where it was trending towards define the front yard as the front property line to the front plane of your house. And that becomes problematic for somebody who's got and there are many houses in town that are on large lots. The house might be 500-600 feet back. And if you wanted to put your accessory garage in your quote unquote front yard, you would then have to go through a whole permitting process, where today you wouldn't have to do that. So we backed away. And this is just really, like I said, inserting the word, and so that it's clear for people that this is what the building department was enforcing it. And there's a diagram A in the zoning table that has the required front yard, side yard, rear yards, and then it has a diagram that shows like a through lot, what those setbacks are, as well as a corner lot. So this is really to try to clarify it for people.
Yeah.
So I can move to the next one if you are comfortable with this one. I'll go to 25. So 25 is making changes to allow for parking flexibility for the planning board for projects that have outdoor recreation, conservation, parkland uses, to give them some discretion through the special permit process. I'll call it really context fit parking. So as opposed to the section, so F7 of the zoning bylaw, spells out parking size dimensions. It spells out aisle widths, prescriptive standards for parking, which for many commercial sites and such makes a lot of sense. But there's cases where where we're talking about more environmental type uses where you might want to create a couple of parking spaces, 2 or 3 spaces. You want to try to fit them in the landscape and with the contour. This gives the planning board the flexibility to do that through a special permit process. And it allows them to do it for non-municipal parking areas. So a good application of this would be, I think I mentioned to you before, that Mass Audubon has developed a trail from North Street down to Marshall Street. And on the Marshall Street side, they wanted to put some parking in there for people to be able to, not many spaces, but just a few spaces. And under the present bylaw, it was too rigidly structured that essentially they have to pave it because it had to be paved surface, number one. But in addition to that, the aisle widths and the parking requirements made it infeasible to do it in a way that you wouldn't transform that area in town by Marshall Street in terms of putting in parking for people who want to use that open space. So that would allow them to do it. And then the one that we did talk about, which the zoning changes, the next ones we'll talk about, the Nature Center, is the Norfolk Airport property, which is owned by Leland Weil LLC. Similarly, they wanted to provide some off-street parking that's safe for people to use. But again, kind of that context parking that fits within the use. So they would, again, be able to take advantage of, or advantage is maybe a poor choice of word, but be able to utilize this ability through a special permit process as well for the parking. And it would give the planning board the ability to decide what makes sense or not. So that's the value, at least the perceived value, by making this change.
A quick question, Rich.
Sure.
How does this intersect with like ADA requirements for parking?
So ADA, you'll still have to, so you actually can have alternative surfaces besides pavement to meet ADA. So you're still going to have to meet ADA where ADA requirements are. So you very well could have a more compacted parking surface for the handicap and the handicap accessible routes. But then the other area might be more not as compact in terms of material. But you also might just have similar to what we have on Pond Street, where the handicap parking space would be paved. Not all, if the trails aren't necessarily accessible, somebody could potentially make it more accessible, but not quite. They could seek a waiver to not have to provide handicap accessible parking if, again, where that intended use is, if it's not accessible, they could get a waiver to that, but they still have to comply with that. So, and that's part of the parking bylaw provision.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I don't think we haven't got that far with Mass Audubon in terms of the one I was mentioned to you about Marshall Street, but I certainly know that in terms of Marshall Street, that end of their property right now, it's certainly not, you could not put in accessible parking. So we're going to have to we'll need to figure that out with them as they move forward with that project. But that would be something the planning board we'll be addressing with them at that time. So that's the intent of those changes. Where there was more certainly conversation, concern, so forth on.
Is this the one that was going to affect Stony Brook negatively? Not on purpose, but.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. And those changes have been fixed?
Those changes have been fixed. So as I scroll through, you can see. So the first one that comes out is under section D, is to include and their family. It certainly wasn't intended if somebody was. This one in particular really doesn't quite affect Mass Audubon because they already have an existing building with a residence in it. Because this provision is for a new dwelling unit. Now, if they wanted to put a new dwelling unit on additional property that they have, which is across the street, then it would come into play. But at least the existing house that's on the property, this wouldn't apply to. But anyway, we added, the planning board took the concerns from the public and made this change. They voted to and their family. So it certainly wasn't intended to exclude families. It just wasn't as clear. So that was changed. And then these other change, and you see the strike through language, I think, which is good. So you can just see there was concerns of not allowing the rental for outside persons for parties, weddings, and similar events. It was in terms of Mass Audubon, they do a lot of birthday parties there. They did say at the public hearing they actually have done a wedding in Mass Audubon in the past, and they do have other entities or different groups have utilized their space for other events and so forth. So having getting that feedback from everyone, the planning board deleted this provision. I will say one of the things that we did talk about at the beginning, which Mass Audubon talking to the attorney, was the Dover Amendment, which they would be exempted as an educational use. They do have that status, but they really weren't quite comfortable resting on that because opinions change over time. And, one might say, yeah, they have that protection. Someone might interpret it otherwise. So the landing spot for this was to just delete it. I think, there hasn't been concerns raised by people within the area at Mass Audubon. And then likewise, going forward for Leland Wild, over time, that might be something that they would like to do as well. And in their case, they'll have, if this goes through, they'd be going through a permitting process. It'd be neutral to Mass Audubon at the moment because they will just continue to do what they're doing today. We did that header was added, which is not really a change to the bylaw. That's just more for the reader to know what the zoning bylaw section that the heading is. But then we did add no and no. It didn't, the last time you saw it, it just saw SP here in bold. And so one of the comments at the hearing was, what about the other zoning districts? So not to get too far afield and talking about zoning districts, we just they wanted to go all the way across the board. So, but I'm going to just scroll back just so you see the heading. My recommendation to planning board, which they did follow through, was just add it to no on those two columns in the table of allowable uses, because the way our present bylaw is structured, the C district has its own special section with uses and so forth, the same way as the B1. So you don't see it in this table overall. And you will see it in some other areas of the table of allowable uses, but that has turned out to be problematic because it shows up in this table, but it conflicts with the other one. It's probably way more information than you wanted to know. But in terms of interest, in terms of the bylaw, So those no and no, and there's intent to be no's in the other districts. So that kind of summarizes these articles.
And Rich, I'm
Yep.
sorry. Go ahead, Dave.
Rich, can I ask a specific question about the weddings and birthday party thing?
Mhm.
So I'm imagining, I'm looking at Stony Brook, and that the thing that was struck would have sort of prohibited them from doing that without seeking prior approval or something like that, right?
Right. Yep.
So I've only been to the airport property a couple times, but let's just say someone planned on having a wedding there with like 200 people. The traffic getting to that property is a mess. It's a tiny road at the end. It's a property at the end of a fairly narrow road. Is there any sort of general requirement for folks seeking to do large events on any private properties in town? I'm thinking about traffic and parking, basically. So you know what I'm saying?
So if you,
So let's pretend the airport guys decided to have a party that had 250 guests, and 175 of them drove their individual cars. That's going to be a mess for that neighborhood.
So as of right now, there isn't anything that would allow for that, because the fundamental reason why this is here is because they don't have the right to do any of that.
But I thought that's what the purpose of striking that line was to allow for Stony Brook to hold weddings and birthday parties.
It is, but it's also applicable. This is, I would just tell you, in terms of this became more of a compromise, one support the other. It probably would, I would argue, more driven by Mass Audubon than Leland Wild.
I understand that, but are there impacts on the Leland Wild property? And
in terms of Leland Wild, they will have to go through a permitting process.
Okay.
So then through that process was the special permit and then the site plan, the planning board could impose conditions on them
Okay.
to regulate that.
The only thing I would say is that it works for Stony Brook because Stony Brook's on the corner of a main road. But if it was any further up that road, it could be a nightmare. But
It could be. It could, yeah, I'm not.
traffic wise, that's what
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. Yeah, no. So I guess the kind of the fallback in the safeguards to the town at least is that that they will need to go through a permitting process, and that actually they could put conditions on it from the start, in terms
all
of
right.
how to regulate it. So those were, we okay on those? I go back to the beginning, so to speak?
Just logistically, this will be like automatically renumbered if the renumbering passes, all the, D2, A1, 2.
That's a great question.
It kind of says that in the beginning of the article, but it kind of doesn't either.
I'm gonna presume, which could be dangerous, right? That we're gonna have to, if this gets voted, we'll have to renumber it to coincide with the recodification. Although it's,
Yeah, Rich, if I could say something here.
Sure.
We did ask that came up at our planning board meeting, and town council did say that, when that would anything that gets approved at this town meeting would have to get incorporated and renumbered appropriately.
And it would happen automatically. We wouldn't need another town vote to renumber.
Correct.
Really?
That's what would it happen
Well, can
automatically
we,
and need another town vote?
Can we ask?
I don't, that's a great question. And if I recall correctly, he said anything that gets voted on at this town meeting, because you have to vote on it with the old numbering system, right? So everything that's all incorporated in this town meeting will get automatically and I'd have to go back and look at the minutes from the last planning board, which was last week, but that was my understanding. It would all get renumbered because it's all at the same town meeting.
It's pretty simple. You could have an amendment in your back pocket that just has the alternative numbering on it. And if it passes early, if the renumbering passes, then you substitute the new table.
But it doesn't go into effect at the time that it's adopted, Rob.
Yeah, it was my understanding anything that gets voted on at this town meeting would automatically be part of that process because it's all at the same meeting. Because you can't have the new numbers. You can't. We would have to not have any of these articles on, right?
I think we're all
on board.
Yeah. I think we're all trying to figure out to make sure that we get it right. But
yeah,
I'm gonna defer to Blythe here and say this is the kind of thing we want to talk to our high-paid legal group on, right?
I would agree. I think we need to just check in with town council as well, because
Town council and the guys who are paying a ton of money to do this too.
right, exactly. Because sequentially, this is at least on the warrant after the recodification.
I don't think it goes into effect the minute we adopt it.
No, it's retroactive to town meeting with AG approval, but it's a good question. We need to have a more solid answer. So I'll talk to town council. We might need to have, I don't know. We got to get.
Yeah, I can jump in here. I know on Article 24, there is reference to the fact that the new number would be within the numbering of the new set of zoning bylaw. That would be 310-6.5. So Rich and I have a meeting with them early next week. We'll go over this with a fine tooth comb, make sure that we're all set on it before your next meeting.
Okay.
We thought we had, but we'll check again.
Well, it's definitely a point to make sure we're on.
someone has their hand up.
You guys, I can't see when your hands are up, so
Donna Jones.
yeah, just interrupt. It's fine.
Thank you, Donna Jones. Regarding the nature centers and the parking, notice the new definition says it must be at least 25 acres. What happens at Stony Brook now is there's parking for less than 25 paved spots. There is a field right next to it that overflow parking goes into. We can have 100 cars there. We have for 40 years for a fall fair. And it's just a slight backup on the street as people are pulling into the parking lot. I would assume that if Leland Wild had something, people need to not park on the street, but get onto the property to allow the street to be open. So the way it's worked for Stony Brook is that everybody gets off the street to park and you can have your function. Thank you.
Thanks, Donna.
So jump.
Is that the case, Rich?
What's that?
What she just said.
Yeah, there is parking. There's paid parking. Then the field off of North Street, people park in the grass area there as well. There's quite, it's like going to the fair, right? So you go to the county. Well, not all county fairs, but a good amount of county fairs. You have parking. You park on the grass field, and it's similar in Mass Audubon. They have parking that you can park on the grass there to handle a larger number. In terms of Mass Audubon, though, they only had one wedding there, so I'm not, I suppose they could have more, but I think the bigger concern for them was the birthdays. The birthday parties are very, very
And they're
popular.
Yeah. My comment was, I understand the birthday party things. Hopefully no kids are having 50 or 60 kids to their birthday party. But weddings are a different case. And, one wedding is the beginning of the flood. So potentially, that's all I'm saying.
Yeah. No, And that's why I think in terms of the new, in terms of Leland Wild, they would have to go through the permitting process we talked about.
Okay.
So hopefully that should provide sufficient safeguards. Donna, is your hand up from before or another question?
Just to share my experience with Stony Brook. They share what they have for facilities, how many people the building can hold, how many tables and chairs we have. And then it doesn't matter how many, as long as we stay within those limits, it doesn't matter how many people show up for the birthday party, the memorial service, any event, as long as they get off the street, they park there. No neighbors have complained.
Donna, I'm not commenting on the operations at Stony Brook. I'm commenting generally on what the potential impacts might be for other properties that could get covered under this. So that's
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, so I'll jump back up, starting with Article 20, which is the recodification articles. So I will say, and if you were able to see my email ahead of time, great. If not, I'll just kind of recap it. But in terms of the zoning with the recodification articles, at the time, as this was going through the process with general code, staff and town council reviewing it and going through the different versions of it. And then when there was placeholders on the warrant, the planning board hadn't actually seen the document back in February at that time, because we just got the final draft in the middle of March. But in discussions with town council, we talked about that procedurally under Mass General Law, there's steps you got to follow. So at the March 30th planning board meeting, the planning board voted to recommend the recodification articles. They referred them back to the select board for going back to the planning board in terms of the statutory processes to be in order to adopt the zoning changes. So the planning board, technically their hearing won't be till April 28th on these three articles. But in general terms and discussion in terms of sponsoring the articles, they were comfortable with them, with the exception of the substantive change, which was the definition of family. And so what I wanted to do is scroll through and get to that particular article. Just gonna go down. I'm not a word whiz, that's why I kept this showing so we can just take a look at it. But so the green is the definition that was proposed to be revised. So general code identified our family definition being a little bit not a little bit, but it was outdated in terms of how we define family. Upon review with the planning board on the 30th of March, they further said, I don't like the term traditional family. I have an issue with that in terms of where we are in the world today. So if you look in the comment section, the right-hand side, the pinkish block, the planning board, the general code offered two options for family definition. And it looks like number two might be the leader in terms of what the planning board would want to support, to recommend. So based on that, we're going to put that in the warrant as the recodification substantive change for family. And hopefully it gets supported and gets changed. And then furthermore, hopefully the advisory board is okay with that definition too. Because because I can tell you the planning board didn't like the proposed definition, so it was, and Chad could speak up to this. It was to the point that they really had a trepidation of sponsoring the recodification with that definition in it. So it was a significant issue in their minds.
Hey,
Yeah, Rich, this is Chad. Rich is correct. We had some members of the planning board that were very, very concerned about the word traditional and how you define a traditional family. And we said, look, and so we as a board agreed, okay, let's proceed to approve the changes, but except for this one piece, and because we still have a few more planning board meetings where we can nail this down, but we don't want that to hold up moving forward with all of this. And so that's where Rich got a few other samples, as you can see here, on what is the definition of family. And so then we have all responded back to Rich independently on what our vote is, and we will discuss it at our next planning board meeting.
can I ask a couple questions?
Yep.
Sure.
Susan, you okay with that?
Yes, of course.
So-
Go ahead.
Where I missed the slide. Where is this in? Is this in a non-substantive, a substantive change? Where is this?
No, this is a substantive change.
Could this be its own change?
It is.
Yeah. Rich kind of.
Its own article, I guess, is what I'm.
Yes.
asking.
It is. It's Article 22.
All by itself.
Right.
All right.
Yep.
Okay, I see that now. I apologize.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
But I guess, is there no other example in state of city and town bylaws in Massachusetts? Or are one of these drawn from one of those?
So this came to us via general code. They canvassed, as you know, you probably heard how many cities and towns that they have. And so this is what they pulled from what they canvassed and submitted these two. There might be other ones that maybe aren't necessarily under general code from another community that might be out there that might be better than this one. But this is what they're providing as an alternative.
So,
If you want to,
what does the definition of family buy me? If I live in a house that meets one of these definitions, what does it get me within the zoning bylaws? Do you get my point?
I think what he's trying, maybe I'm wrong. I'm sorry, David. I think what he's trying to say is, why is this necessary? Am I right? You're asking
A little bit. It's like, why do we have this definition? And if I meet the definition, what does this create within the zoning bylaws that me and 3 work colleagues don't get?
It stops you from having a boarding house, Dave.
Well, but what's the definition of a boarding house? Is there a definition of a boarding house?
Well, no, but you could have like 6 people renting rooms in your house. And
No,
that's
I understand what you're saying, Rob, but when I was 24 years old, I lived with 3 other guys who I loved to death, but we all paid our separate bills and blah, 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 blah. Were we a family at that point? Or if we all paid our rent to one person, were they the owner? Were they the boarder, or were we the boarders and they were the renter? I mean, I don't get.
yeah.
I'm trying to figure out why we have a definition of family unless you're rent. I mean, my brother lived in a couple boarding houses and they all had locks on their bedroom doors. I mean,
Right.
and that was I worked for the city of Somerville, and frankly, that was the definition of a boarding house. Was what happened inside the building in terms of separation of tenants. But if everyone sits in the same living room and doesn't lock their doors, does that make it a family? My
instinct would be you're opening a can of worms by saying family. You might want to say household. Household does the same thing because it denotes that there are shared bills and shared spaces when you refer to it as a household. Writing the word family leaves it open for interpretation and could be used in a discriminatory way. If you want to outlaw specifically boarding houses, then just write a bylaw that says we want to outlaw boarding houses, let it go to vote and see what people say. But using the verbiage of family can get tricky.
Well, we do talk about boarding houses in the bylaw, but families, it has to be defined because it's used in a bunch of other different definitions. You know, a single family house, a dwelling unit is a quarter for a single family, and family is capitalized, which means it's defined somewhere else in the bylaw. So unless we go and change, like, you know, dwelling comma single family to dwelling comma single household everywhere it shows up, you gotta say what you mean by family.
Right.
But I think Susan's got a point though, Rob. I mean,
Well, that's why I think
I also lived in 1 year. I lived with a bunch of guys I didn't know, and for all intents and purposes, it was a boarding house, but we didn't have locks on our doors. Were we a family unit at that point? Because we all sat together on the 31st of every month and divided up the utility bills, or were we not a family unit?
Right. Like, for example, I own a house. If I decide to rent it out to college kids, does it now not qualify? Can I not do that in Norfolk? Is that what you're saying? If I want to rent it, are you saying you have control over who I rent it to? It's a single family house. It's a 3-bedroom house. But if I want to rent it to 3 college kids who pay separately, you're saying that that's not allowed?
Yeah, I think you might find that's not allowed. I haven't been on the zoning board in a while, but I think you would find that's not allowed.
so.
But let's say one of them buys it and has 2 of his buddies. One of them buys it and turns it into a fraternity for Dean College. I think I'm trying to be a smartass here, but it's because I'm not sure what being defined as a family gets me. And until someone tells me exactly why I can't rent, why I can't own my house and rent the bedroom upstairs where my daughter has moved out to someone, is that person a member of my family or not?
So I think what it gets you in terms of, so if you're, for example, it's your house and have different people residing with you, it gives you, I'll call it more protection in terms of what you would consider your household. So for example, right now, and Rob's to the point is we do allow renting of rooms, not more than 4 persons. So it says, this is the boarding house, renting of rooms to not more than 4 persons and furnishing of table boards not to more than 5 persons, which is allowed in the residential district by right. I think the value of changing this is that the present definition for family uses the term kinship in terms of how it's defined. So 2nd degree of kinship. So depends how you want to look. It gives you more flexibility, I guess.
You have to be related. Currently, you have to be related to be a family.
Yeah, right.
And so I don't listen. I don't disagree with that part of it. I'm just trying to get my head around at what point the town draws a line between fellow renters who all work together someplace and decided to. I actually have a great example. The guy up the street, when he bought his house, he rented it to 2 of the guys he rented the other bedrooms to 2 guys he worked with. He was essentially running a boarding house, but they were probably closer to a family than a boarding house. But I don't get there's no bright line. It's like this kind of drift towards, and I know what a boarding house is, and I know what a single family home is, but I think there's this massive gray area in between.
Well, I think the one positive note in this is in terms of it's out on its own. So if we don't take any action on this, then what's on the books today remains.
Right.
And what is exactly on the books today? If we take no action, what stays on the books?
Yeah, so I'll read it. I'll read it to you right now, and then I'll read it for now, and then I'll send it to you via email afterward. So family, one or more persons occupying a dwelling unit, which we do define, and living as a single nonprofit housekeeping unit, semicolon, provided that a group of 5 or more persons who are not within second degree of kinship shall not be deemed to constitute a family.
So my third cousin could live in my house. It has to be my cousin.
Well,
No,
that doesn't make sense, because there's adult people who cohabitate who are not family, regardless of, forget boarding house. There are just people who live together as friends, or they live together as a couple, but they're not married, or they don't have any kind of civil union. You're saying they have to be a family? That doesn't.
No. So guys, it's not like Norfolk will tell you who you can have in your house or not. It's because family shows up in the definition of other things, and it itself has to be defined because it's in there already in other places. And I think originally when they wrote this, they were trying to get at boarding houses. You'll note boarding houses is defined, but it's not actually anywhere on the use table. So that was probably an amendment somewhere that it said you couldn't have boarding house in R1, and maybe it went away. I don't exactly know what happened, but I think we're wrapping ourselves around the axle a little bit unnecessarily here.
Rob, like I said, I'm not arguing with the specific terms of the definition. I'm just trying to get a sense of what. Is there anything?
I think
whatever. I don't. Yeah, I'm not even. It doesn't.
I think some of the examples, David, that you were talking about would feel much better within that second proposed option, right? So any number of persons, residing together on the premises as a single house.
No, I agree with you, Rich. I don't understand what happens.
I think the idea is to try to define it.
Until I start locking the doors and charging people for their rooms, which is in the bylaws somewhere as a boarding house.
Well, let's put this way.
Everything else is a family unit, and I don't have any problem with that. I'm trying to. Yeah. I'm being a.
Well, to take Rob's point,
buys me.
We do. So to Rob's point, we do have a definition for family. They've identified problems with our existing definition where it could be tripped up based on how people are living today,
right?
And what they would consider a family unit. And we don't want, at least I think most people don't want to have us being the family police going in, decide. So we need something. And this is a whole area that.
Would it be better to say something along the lines of residents of a single family dwelling who share a common household? Therefore, you can pay your rent separately, but because you share the kitchen, or because you share the living room, or you share whatever the duties are in the house, or a portion of the bills, the power bill is split 3 ways, or whatever, that constitutes a single family dwelling because there is shared household expenses. That to me would be a better definition than trying to get into the weeds of being specific on you have to be related in this way or that way or whatever. Just saying that you share a common household would be better. Because specifically a boarding house does not do that, I would assume, and it's also specifically outlawed for boarding houses. So just defining a family as a group of people who live together with a shared household, that should be a decent enough definition, in my opinion. But I mean, what do I know?
That's sample
I just
two,
think
right?
the issue is the issue for me is the word family, which clearly isn't what sample 2 or sample 3 are. They're a collective, they're a household, as Susan just said, but they're not a family. And that's the problem, is the word family has, I don't want to raise this, but it's the same debate we had with the word marriage 15 years ago.
Dave, we don't have single collective homes in Massachusetts
of connotations attached to it. So, which is why the planning board was unhappy with the word traditional family.
That's right. Yeah. For us, the big sticking point was the traditional. We had to get rid of the kinship and all that in the original because it just isn't the recodification group or whatever they're called. They were like, you can't have this anymore.
But I think defining a family as either one of these things is going in the other direction.
Dave, the problem is that then you have to deal with all the other references to the family.
I understood exactly what Rich said, what Rich, I think, meant when he said that. And I don't disagree with that. But I also think if we're going to make a change like this, that has to be part of the consideration.
So, David, I have a question. So,
sure.
What if you if you look at the green text on the screen,
would you make it a little bit larger? I'm sorry, Chad, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I can't read it at all. So I can only hear what you guys are saying. I can't see the changes. So if Rich, if you could zoom that in for me. Go ahead, Chad. I'm sorry.
So what if, the planning board had a big problem with the word traditional. And so we asked Rich to find other alternative definitions. But what if you just drop the word traditional out of that and you just call it, the word traditional goes away and you just say family? Does that help, or does that still just leave it a gray area for you?
Well,
Chad, I'm not prepared to comment on that, except as I started from the beginning, I don't want to hold this up. I apologize.
Yeah, no, that's fine. But, this is good conversation.
It just seems if you took the first reference traditional out, you'd have to take the second reference traditional out. And then it doesn't mean anything. So
it's very vague.
Right.
Well, and I guess sample 2, the pink box, makes a lot of sense to me from a real active way of making it work, except for the word family, which I guarantee you the definition of family in almost any legal sense isn't going to be as loose as this.
But it doesn't matter because it's referring to words in a zoning code, which mean what you're talking about, Dave. It means a single unit, but we don't have single unit housing. We have single family housing. You got to put a word on it, and sample 2 does exactly what you want it to do.
Except
now that I can read it, if the only reference to family is to explain what they mean when they say family in other parts of the bylaw, and it just says that it means a group of people living in a single family household and sharing common household things, then I don't have an issue with it, as long as it doesn't say traditional family unit. I don't the kinship part really got to me. And again, I wasn't reading it. I was only listening to you guys because the print was too small. So as long as it doesn't say that, I don't think there's I think it's okay as long as you're just referring to what the definition is, where it is placed in other parts of the bylaws.
I think the most important thing, and I'm sorry for talking too much here, but in the bylaw, there's a definition for dwelling, single family, which is defined as a building occupied by a single family, all caps. That means it has to be defined somewhere, and having no party walls or walls in common with an adjacent structure.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the important place. That's why you need to define this thing, because it means a single unit, not like 6 different apartments in a building.
So no duplexes and no.
Well, duplexes are defined separately. There's
It's multifamily.
Actually, they're not, but multifamily.
All right.
Multifamily, right.
In an effort to move beyond this, I will keep my mouth shut in perpetuity on this issue, but it's going to be a problem at town meeting.
So if I understand this correctly, if we do nothing, if this doesn't get approved, then the current language stays, which has kinship in it, right?
Correct. Yep.
And E-code was like, look, that is not appropriate. And I'm not saying that we need to force fit this just right now. We need to find the acceptable language that everybody's comfortable with. And so if the options presented in front of us aren't comfortable, okay, well, we need to go back to the drawing board and find some that are. And maybe,
I'm not sure there isn't. I don't think there is a. This is a debate that is much larger than the recodification of our zoning bylaws.
I agree. Yes.
And that's the issue here. And I'm not prepared to have that debate now or at town meeting, but someone will want to do it.
I don't know. Sorry, go ahead, David.
No, I'm done.
I'm not sure you want to take this on. I'm not sure this is even feasible to do in the short term. But the other option is the way we did it years ago, where we just changed we went through and it took time, but they changed the verbiage from he to them so that it encompassed everyone. If you really want to make sure that you're encompassing all aspects and there won't be any issues, you can go back and change wherever it says family and change it to single household instead of single family.
Even just household.
But you can't call it single household because I believe there's
household.
You'd have to change it to household because you define single and then families, or it's single and then the definition of family. So it'd have to go single household. Then we have multi-family. So yeah, we'd have to change the word family to household. And we'd have to look at the implications of that.
If you want it to be as completely non-offensive as possible, that's probably the way to go. But if you're going to keep the word family in there because of this point that we're at, I definitely think the kinship thing needs to come out. Mm-hmm. And I'm not opposed to the way that you have described family in sample 2. As long as, again, it just says any number of people residing together that are sharing the common household. So that's fine. I think what David's trying to say is if he had it his way and his preference, it would be family would be eliminated from the bylaw verbiage everywhere.
Pretty much.
I don't know that you have time for that. I don't know that that's even a possibility.
And like I said, I'll keep my mouth shut and I'll vote for this. But
I definitely think
it's like a half a loaf. It's like a half a loaf. So
right.
Oh, it's
definitely like you're trying to do something, but it didn't go far enough. Again,
wait, Susan, just another perspective. Leaving it as it is intolerable.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's definitely not tolerable. That's why I said sample 2. I'm not sure what the other options were, but I'm definitely not opposed to sample 2. But I think if you really truly want to make it reference what you're actually trying to say, you could probably start by cleaning up wherever it says family and changing it to household. But again, I don't know that that's something we have 3 more weeks. I don't know if you have time for that.
I'm pretty sure we don't have time for that.
Yeah,
no.
make that kind of.
But as I understand it, we also can't ask the company that did all this codification to make any more changes, right?
So the one thing I will say that I would investigate talking to council and then back through general code is, I think the takeaway is, is there, so these are 2 sample suggestions to address it. I do agree, like, we do define units, so I don't think we can totally depart away from family at this point, but this number 2 at least takes the existing one off out of the zoning bylaws for now. And maybe we could have something that the planning board could entertain at the public hearing that might be a better alternative than sample 2.
Again, I want to make it clear, I don't have a problem with sample 2. I'm simply saying that if you truly want to make the change, I would think referring to it as household. I like sample 2 better than sample 3.
Okay. All right.
Well, Rich is just weird.
It's weird.
Yeah, sample 3 is living and cooking together.
My son doesn't eat dinner with us, so does that mean he's not a member of my family?
Yeah.
Well, that's why I think that's why the consensus at least was with 2. I think it was better.
I'm sorry.
It's better, not best. I'm not saying it's best for sure.
Well, Rich, we could go with number 2 now because we can't make that change to household at this time. We go with option 2, and then
that's basically
next year. Next year we revisit this. Make sure we could change it to household.
Correct. And you may not need to. I mean, we're just 2 people. Maybe nobody else has an issue with this. Maybe this is something that, we're seeing the downside to, because we've been trained to do that with being on the board, is to read these things and see where the potential pitfalls are. But maybe there won't be any pitfalls. Maybe it'll sail through swimmingly and there'll be no issues and it just stays the way it is. I just think that it should be a conversation at some point. Should there be any discussion at town meeting, on it. Again, I can't speak for David, but this is what I do when I listen to these things. When you guys present to us, not you, the planning board, but anyone who comes to present to us, when I'm listening to you, I try to put myself in the situation, not necessarily what I think, but try to see how would the rest of the town think? What are they going to hear? Who is this going to offend? Who is this going to hurt? Where are their questions going to be? Is this something they're going to oppose? Is it just basically where the potential pitfalls are going to be? And maybe it won't be. Maybe this one will not even get noticed, and that's great if that's the case. But if it does, I think you need to have it something on the back burner, because we don't want to have them vote no because they don't like this verbiage, and then we have to leave the kinship thing in there. So I think that we should definitely have the conversation about changing it potentially, like you said, next year, so that we can say that to them. We can say, okay, we were prepared for this. We were prepared for people to be opposed to this. Here's our solution. We're going to define family as this today, and we're going to move forward with reframing it next year to be labeled as household. But that takes more time, but we wanted to get this part on the books now, and then let people know that that change can come at a later date should it come up. And again, if it doesn't come up, then we just don't talk about it at all. It didn't come up. That would be my recommendation.
So the planning board is gonna, we'll say they'll bring forward sample 2 as their proposed option for.
And as I said, I'll support that. I think it's going to be controversial. I think Susan's right. I used to sit with the grumpy guys at town meeting, as Rob can tell you, because he used to sit next to me. And this is why I'm on the advisory board, because I'm one of the grumpy guys.
I think this is a framing issue. We really have to frame it as this is not the family police running around and seeing who's living with whom.
I agree with you, Rob. I just, it's
Well, I think that's the whole.
Not perfect, and because it's not perfect, it's going to cause all sorts of problems. So,
I mean, that's the value of this discussion. So, to make sure it's framed appropriately, and so the feedback right now is important for town meeting, sure, to not and the fact that it's by itself too, but so
That's the biggest issue, Rich, is that it's its own article.
yeah. But I think it has to be, right? Because if it wasn't,
No, you're right. It does have to be because it's a substantive change. But the flip side is it's a substantive change that will make people read it.
It's actually the only substantive change we're looking to make in the zoning bylaw. The general bylaw has a few, including, mechanical bucking devices, which I thought until now was going to get all the noise, all the airtime, but maybe not.
There's actually a Supreme Court case on this very issue, decided in 1974, which did give communities the right to define what is a family and to police it.
Gives what?
Communities.
Oh, really?
Determine what is. I haven't read the decision. I was just reading an abstract. But
I think we need to have a family definition subcommittee of something. No, I'm just kidding. But moving on. I apologize for holding this up, but
did you? So that wraps the in terms of the zoning town meeting. Did you? I know, Susie. The master plan articles on there. Did you want to hear from Chad? Thoughts on that article? I know that was part of it.
Absolutely.
All right.
So that is Article 10, 12? Forget where it's renumbered. So Article 12.
Article 12.
Yeah, Article 12, planning board seeking to raise funds basically for the town master plan. Our current master plan is from 2007. And so there has been a growing discussion amongst the planning board and the select board to update that plan since it is 15 years old, and a lot's changed in our community over the last 15 years. And I feel like just life in general has changed exponentially over the last decade. So there's a need to get this updated. And so we currently we're estimating that this is going to be about $140,000 project. We have $40,000 right now in a grant. And so we're looking for $50,000 now, and then $50,000 next year at town meeting for a total of $140. But we do have enough now to get started with the project and at least get the goals established for the master plan.
I ask a question.
Yep.
Susan, may I ask a question?
Of course. Go ahead.
I think it's a good idea to do this. Who used the old one? Who still looks at it? Which boards, which committees, which bodies in town use this as a guidance document? Because essentially that's what it is. There's no force of law in it. It's just recommendations.
Right.
So the zoning board of appeals does use it in terms of when they make findings for special permits.
Does it have the force of law in those cases?
Force of law.
Meaning, if they reference it in one of their decisions, does that help hold up the decision?
Probably not as a single element of a decision, but I would think it does help. But I'm just trying to answer the question, who uses it. So the planning board uses it as they use it, and we have used it and continue to use it in terms of other projects and things that the town has laid out to investigate further. So, for example, The housing production plan that was produced in 2017 has pieces of that. Its origin from the master plan. The work we'll be doing shortly with Southwood Hospital site in terms of planning, that again was identified in that master plan and in terms of a guidance document. So it is used. It doesn't have a force of law, but it certainly is utilized in other boards, committees, and other projects that we use.
I read the last one since this came up a month ago or whatever it was. There's a lot of value in what that talks about. I mean, a lot of the schooling stuff, some of the open space stuff. I do think it's something that we probably need to update more quickly than every 15 years. I'm just trying to figure out who's paying attention to it, except for me when I read it, when it's brought up at a meeting 15 years after it's written. So
I think one of the things, David, that towns are not just Norfolk and other towns, but in particular other towns, is that the newer plans that have been developed, they've actually had an implementation committee. So not just a steering committee in the creation of the document, but then an implementation committee that lays out tasks that need to be implemented. And then they meet as a body to see and monitor what's being done. Is there action taken? If it is, what is the outcome? And so there's actually is that follow-up step after that to make sure. So that's something that many towns are doing, because to prevent not utilizing the document and also go forward with those recommendations are not just to have a master planning session, people get together and then nothing comes of it.
Thank you, Rich. That's exactly what I was trying to get at. So thank you.
Yep. And I don't know if there's any other questions.
Anyone else had a question? I had one.
My only comment will be, it's not that I'm opposed in general to a master plan. I think a town needs a master plan. My opposition is, I feel there needs to be a very good explanation, other than, well, because we need it and it's been 15 years. There's got to be a good explanation at town meeting for people when they say, why are we spending $100,000 on this now? Like right now, like with the economy where it is, pricing for things the way they are. What is the importance of doing it this year, 2022, versus doing it in 2024? Not saying that it doesn't need to be done. I'm just saying, and I'm not even saying that I won't support it. I'm just saying I want there to be an answer at the ready of why it needs to be done now versus in a couple of years when, the town or the economy or whatever it is might be in a better position, might not, might be in a worse position. We don't know. But I'm just saying there needs to be an answer to people. We have to be able to say to them, here's why this money needs to be spent now. Okay. So I guess that is my question to Chad is, thank you for coming. And that's my opposition to it. And I'm not saying I'm opposed, but that's the question I need answered. Why now versus at another point?
Yeah, that's a very valid question, and I can definitely put together some bullet points to answer that. Absolutely, we can have that ready for town meeting. And you're right, playing devil's advocate is always good, because I'm sure that will come up, and we need to be prepared for that. So Rich and I had already talked about putting some of that together, and that's another great point. Yeah.
What I meant by that, just on a much smaller scale, I like to give examples so people understand where I'm coming from, is if the kitchen in your house is dated and it's not operating correctly and you want to remodel it, but you have to borrow the money to remodel it versus you can spend a couple of years saving the money to remodel it, so to speak. I know that's not the position the town's in. That's not what I mean. I'm just using this as an example. Most normal people would say, well, why don't I wait until I'm in a better financial position to do something, versus if your kitchen is absolutely broken or was ruined by a flood or a fire or it's just not working at all, then you would say, you know what, even though I'm not in the greatest financial position right now, it's very important for me to get this done now. So I think that's what I'm looking at, is not that we don't need a new kitchen, so to speak, but why do we need the kitchen today versus waiting and having it be part of, the planning process, the budgeting process, at whatever point that we're not, over budget, so to speak. So
one reason I would put on the list is that the grant that Rich wrote and the town won to start the process will go away at a certain point if it's not spent. So while, adding 50,000 to 40 doesn't get us all the way there, I'd hate to have us lose a significant chunk of this and have the town needing to spend more later on, if that was had to be turned back.
And I would, to help, and Chad and I did talk about this a little bit, to put a nice, concise. So we need to work, we're working towards having that answer to that question. But I can say that in terms of the last plan that was done in 2007 was done by a committee of volunteers, and there wasn't outside money in any significant way towards that effort. And since 2007, the town has changed a significant amount, but so as the technology to be able to better convey messaging, inform the public. And so hiring somebody, number one, so the first question would be hiring somebody versus trying to do this on your own. So inherently trying to do it without hiring somebody would extend the time to do something like this, because it's based on a volunteer. Town staff helps, but it's a volunteer-based project. Having somebody hired, they would be able to provide that professional help in terms of presentation, mapping, and then provide the community to know what best practices, what towns are doing to try to address certain issues that may come up through the master planning process. And we have, as Blythe mentioned, we do have the $40,000 that would be the start towards doing the goals and policies. But we also are in the process of finishing up the housing production plan. And so we're capturing that, where we hired a consultant to do that would be integrated into the master plan to cover a large part of what we would talk about in relation to housing. And then in 2024, we're going to need to do an update to the open space and recreation plan. So the things that come out of the master plan process, the housing plan, I would hope would lead into an open space and recreation plan that gets more into how the town is going to kind of guide its future and how it gets developed in terms of being more proactive in terms of meeting with property owners, look at properties as vulnerable for development, talk about strategies to prevent them from being developed. And that open space plan on the back end that would get further into that so that we're more proactive in trying to address the things. Because everything that we do in terms of the town is all based on a growth model. It's not a no growth model. So how we grow is kind of the center point of this process. And so we want to try to do it in a better way and have explanations to the town residents. Why is this happening? And what is the outcome? If it's happening, why is it happening this way? As opposed to one-off these kind of topics to go forward. And so we're trying to capitalize on what we already have. We do have the grant. And again, there's other things that are happening that would feed into this. And at the end, you might find something that results in this process that money you saved or gone a different direction tenfold. So it's an investment in terms of the town in that sense.
If I can jump in,
Yeah, of course.
Rich, are we compliant with the new section 3A of 40A, the MBTA zoning change?
The portion for which we're not compliant right now is the reasonable area requirements, which is in the draft at 50 acres. We are not at 50 acres. We're at 41 acres.
Okay, so we do have a by right multi.
We do.
Provision.
Yes.
Okay.
So what came out of the B1 process was, through that process, was tracking what was potentially coming out of that new zoning for MBTA communities. The only thing we didn't know about at the time was what would be a reasonable area.
Mm-hmm. So I think that would be another useful thing coming out of a master plan process, is to explain to people, you know, what the state rules are and how we do meet them, and how we've for a long time, our downtown zoning has been, more progressive than people give it credit for.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, I think the three big I don't know this, but up to now, we've only been able to really do 40B multifamily. Is Boyd's Crossing technically a 40B, or are they?
It is, yes.
Yeah.
40B.
Friendly 40B.
Yeah, and so was Borelli, and I don't know what's going on the other property, but you still lose things even in a friendly 40B. Still lose
Correct.
control you might like. So I think that makes it a valuable process to go through. And I was around in 2007 when we did the other one, and there was a proposal to have an outside group come in and help with it and do charrettes and do like a community engagement process that really never happened. And I think a community engagement process would have made that zoning a lot more, that discussion a lot more powerful. So I really see the use in this as we grow the town.
And just, Rich, to piggyback a little bit on what you were saying about the open space planning, is that if we don't have a comprehensive and acceptable open space plan, we're not eligible for state funding to buy open space. So
yeah, that one does have
I think that a townwide master plan feeds into a lot of stuff related to that kind of eligibility mission.
It does. It certainly does. So it makes, I would hope that if we're successful in doing the master plan, that when we get into the open space plan, we're able to dive in a little bit deeper in some of these things to be able to really kind of tease out some good strategies and not necessarily take it a little bit deeper than a higher level open space plan. To try to accomplish both those in one budget might be a little bit challenging.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Rich, did you go over all of the zoning articles, all of the zoning bylaw articles that are on there, or did you just go over the ones that were substantive?
No, well, I did go over them. The other ones, you already talked about when I was at the last advisory. Well, no, right. Whenever it was, when town council is here.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that everybody is aware of the additional articles that we didn't discuss tonight that pertain to this, and make sure there are no questions on those either. I know there's no substantive changes to them. I just want to, this is our only shot to answer questions before we have to vote. So I just want to make sure that everyone can answer things.
And I know your big goal was to have everything wrapped up in terms of planning board voting recommendations, but hopefully understood the timing where it didn't work in terms of the recodification stuff. aside from that, the planning board was able to do it. So now when you take your time to go vote, at least you have the recommendations on the other stuff. I think.
When is the planning board voting on it?
So they're voting on it April 28th. So it's good. It would be after you.
Late for us, Susan. So
Yeah, that's after the warrant's been printed.
Right.
What happens if they don't approve something that's already on the warrant?
So technically the planning board can report the day of town meeting, the recommendation. So it's just not good practice. So so in terms of the warrant book, their recommendation won't be in there because it'll already be printed. So they'll have to just, as they ordinarily do, the planning board gives the report at town meeting.
there's been a couple examples over the last little while. I can't remember when.
No, and I understand.
Where the planning board either came in with an amendment or actually opposed something that was on the warrant. So
I understand all of that. And this is just my 2 cents, so please don't take offense. It's probably not good practice for the planning board to not have taken a position on articles from the planning board on the warrant prior to the warrant being printed. Forget presenting to the advisory board. It should definitely be done before the warrant is printed. And I understand what you're saying. You don't have to say it again. I understand they can do it on town meeting floor. I get that. I'm simply saying what probably shouldn't be done.
Well, I will say, let me say this. I think it's important for me to say it. In defense of the planning board, if you remember when I first started, I'll just refresh it. They had no document in front of them to really vote to sponsor at the time back in February. As we said, we're going between general code and town council to review the document. And in all fairness to the planning board, they weren't going to blankly sponsor something at that time without seeing it. So that's why they didn't do it at that time back in February when the warrant, there was placeholder articles. The final draft came from general code in the middle of March, and they've worked around to try to accommodate it. So it was not, the scheduling had nothing to do with them in terms of sequencing. So it's not good. Generally, no, we don't want to do that, but it wasn't a fault of their own.
I'm certainly not saying the planning board hasn't put in the appropriate amount of work or effort on this. I think they've gone, above and beyond. I'm simply just discussing policy or practice for all boards, and not specifically the planning board, just any board in general. It's probably not the best practice to not vote until after the warrant's been printed. That's all.
No,
But I get it that the timing of this and zoning changes are a big deal, and they take a lot of work and a lot of effort. So
the codification has been going on for 2 years, and we just had a change of council that we're thrilled about, but helped us make sure we were really thorough on these things, and it all just took a little longer than anyone would have liked.
Okay.
And maybe I missed this in the discussion. So do we vote on something that isn't approved?
yes,
Yes, we do. Okay.
we can.
Yes. Well,
We don't have to, but we
we
can.
don't have to, but we should, especially with this, because normally if this was something smaller, I might say that we could say the advisory board takes no position on this because the planning board hasn't voted yet. We could certainly say that if it was something smaller, but I think this is too big of a deal for people, and I think they really need to hear what we've been listening to and what our perspective is, because they're not going to get as much information at town meeting or on the warrant as what we have heard. So I think they would really look to us to make a recommendation here. So I know we said last year that if the board hadn't acted, we were going to IP it, but I think these zoning changes are too big of a deal for us to IP. So I don't agree. I mean, obviously the board will find out next week when everybody goes to vote, but I would not suggest that. I think these are substantive changes that we need to take a stance on so that residents of town can be prepared when they come to town meeting. But with that said, seeing as though I completely understand the timing of everything, and I'm not in any way making fault to the planning board on this specific topic. But Blythe, as you and I have discussed in the past, the advisory board is going to start taking the position that if we can't make a full recommendation with the support of the board that's bringing forth the warrant article, there is a chance that we will IP things going forward. So I do think it is good practice and good knowledge for different boards, whether it's zoning or planning or CPC or recreation, whoever it is. If they haven't acted by the time we need to vote, there is a chance that we will IP it. I don't think that's what's going to happen this time, but I would like that to be known going forward. It is important that we have all of the information when we go to vote. So, any other questions, comments, conversation? All right. So if there are, I mean, obviously, I would assume that if Jonathan or Brian, when they watch it on YouTube, if they have any questions, I'm assuming I will recommend that they reach out to Chad or Rich directly for answers to those. But otherwise, I assume that we will be voting next week. Erica, we don't have any more anyone else coming in for presentations, correct? We've gone over every warrant article that needed to be discussed.
Correct.
Okay, so we will be ready to vote next week. We may or may not get into all of them. We may only be able to do the ones that, what we consider the, boilerplate easy ones, but depending on how long the discussion goes. But I think that we should be ready for that next week. If Rich or Chad or Blythe, if you would like to attend next week's meeting, just in case there are any questions that come up in the voting process and you're available, that would be great. If you're not, that's fine too. Anything from anyone else?
I have one thing. So just maybe since Blythe is here, just a quick rundown on how the budget got solved.
Sure. So Todd and I, the budget team, had met after the last select board meeting on the 29th and understood very clearly that the board was not comfortable with reducing the school budget, which left us with a gap of about $40,000. The board was in agreement with the other changes that we had proposed. So we went back and gave it some more thought and decided that we would put forth the budget with the same changes except for the school, and adds $40,000 of ARPA funds to make everything balance. Late yesterday afternoon, as we were getting ready for the select board meeting last night, we received an email from the KP superintendent to let us know that they had made an adjustment to their budget of overall of $100,000, and the town's Norfolk share of that was $32,896. I contacted Mr. Kinney and asked him why, and he said they were requested by both Rentham and Plainville to try to adjust the budget, and so they agreed to do so. And their plan is to make that up with hopefully slightly higher state revenues with either the House or Senate version of the budget, and perhaps some of their excess and deficiency funds. So knowing that, when we went to select board last night, we made them aware of this change and said that helped us, close the gap, and we would then reduce the amount of ARPA funds used by that $32,896. The board then voted to recommend the budget with all the changes that you've seen and the change from yesterday.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Anything else? If not, I'll see everybody next week and I'll take a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you, Mike. All right. See you all next week, 7 p.m. Again, as always, let me know if you cannot make it, because next week we will be voting. So we really need everyone here next week. So thank you, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Right.
Thanks, Chuck.